So we're going to spend time today talking about teaching and learning in residency. And we spend time talking about this really because residency is a little different than kind of the ways you've learned in school so far. The design of residency really is as an apprenticeship by learning through experience rather than learning in the classroom. And so we want to spend some time talking about what that looks like and how you can optimize that. I am going to start screen sharing, which means that it's a little bit harder to see you. So while we're talking here briefly, if you have something to say, just unmute yourself and say it, and we'll stop, okay? And we're going to do a fair amount of interaction today. We'll share this one. All right. So, things we are going to cover today. Really, by the end of today, we want you to make sure that you've got a firm grasp of how you learn in the context of residency. And for those of you who are medical students joining us this morning, you know, the last couple of years of medical school are definitely more apprenticeship-like than the first couple of years, and then especially as you move into your next few years of training. These things will apply to you as well. We want you to have some time to understand and be able to describe your own typical learning preferences and the ways that those may differ from your teachers, your mentors, and the learners who are working with you. And then to use that information to really design appropriate learning experiences for yourself and for the people who are learning from you. So we're going to start with learning preferences. And where I'd like you to start is to take a moment, write things down, or just reflect, but we're going to give you a couple of minutes. And I want you to think about your own learning in medicine, maybe a situation that you remember particularly well being a very good learning experience, and really think about the specifics of it. What were you doing? What were you learning? Who were you learning it with? What was useful for you? If there was somebody who was particularly helpful for you in learning in that situation, be specific. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about it, and we're going to ask you to remember this, so write it down. And what we want you to do is take about 10 minutes to talk with each other about those things that were helpful for you in your learning. What was effective for you, and then what educational activities just don't work for you. Jeremiah, do you know which box you were in? Can you tell me what numbers you were?
Yep, so it looks like I would be in that bottom right hand quadrant.
So why don't you join that group? Anybody else on the call who is not in a group yet and has finished the test, join the group for your box. Otherwise, you're going to take the next 10 minutes to finish the test, and we'll have you join a group at the next breakout. All right, so we're going to come back together here at 8:30.
All right, the workroom's coming back. Yay. Okay, I want you to hold those thoughts because we're going to go back to them. But what I'm going to do here is take a few minutes to give you an idea of the theory that led to how we assigned you guys into those groups. And this is a theory by a man named Malcolm Kolb, who studied adult learning. And Kolb looked at Kolb was kind of in the tradition of Piaget, so he was looking at how learning happens in varying settings, but Piaget looked at children's learning, and Kolb really focused on adult learning. And as Kolb began studying learning, he became less interested in the end point of learning, just did you or did you not learn it, but actually the how of learning, and what are the ways that adults engage in learning. And as he was doing qualitative studies, looking at adults, what he came to is there seemed to be kind of two dimensions of our learning, sort of how we take in new information, and then how we transform that new information, new experience into knowledge and learning. And Kolb really looked at these two dimensions as dialectics that have a tension. We've got opposites on each side. We either grasp new information through a concrete experience, something filtered through our senses, or through a theory, abstract concepts. And then we take that information, process it, and turn it into knowledge, make meaning out of it, either through acting on it directly, active experimentation, or through reflecting on it, chewing on it internally, reflective observation. And these are dialectics because there's the tension of wanting to do both, but not being able to do both at the same time. And Kolb's idea was that this tension then moves us through a cycle that incorporates all of these things, but that we tend to have preferences about where we start in that cycle. And so, again, he was talking about this cycle of, starting somewhere in the loop and then moving through based on the tension. So, for instance, learning, we may have a concrete experience, for instance, of getting yelled at by a borderline patient on 2 East, concrete experience. And then we may reflect on that, step back, think, what just happened? What happened between us? What was going on with that patient? And then we may step back and draw on theory, reading didactics, and understanding concepts like splitting and projective identification, or affect regulation, or interpersonal communication that help us understand what may have gone wrong in that interaction, that then leads us to try something new the next time we interact with that patient, which will then lead to a new concrete experience. And as we're going through this cycle, we're making meaning of experience, which is how Kolb understands learning. This is what we call a constructivist perspective on learning. So a constructivist perspective says that knowledge learning isn't handed down from an expert to a pupil. That's not really how it happens for transformative learning that actually changes behavior, but that what happens is knowledge, experience, meaning is co-constructed, that an instructor and a pupil work together to engage in a new experience together and make meaning together. And Kolb looked at this and said that we all have preference about where we start in this cycle, and what comes most naturally to us. And notably, these things are not, it's not a personality style. It's incorporates some aspects of our personality and preferences, but often also is shaped by our experience. And he defined these four main groups, kind of starting with the top right would be the diverging. So people who prefer to start with bringing in information through concrete experience and then transforming it to knowledge through reflective observation. And so he called these divergers, or a diverging learning style that tends to be emotion oriented, and liking learning settings that involve brainstorming, group work, generating. The diverging part is kind of starting from a point and generating a whole range of possibilities of what that might mean. The assimilators, the bottom right, are people who prefer to take in information through abstract concepts, theories, and ideas, and transform it through reflective observation. So these are thinking-oriented people who prefer to learn in settings like readings and lectures often, where we're talking about ideas and having a chance to chew on those and really grasp them before putting them into practice. People in the bottom left are convergers. So these are people who prefer to take in information through abstract ideas and then they turn them into meaning through active experimentation. And so the converging is kind of this idea of taking lots of information and funneling it down into a practical application. So these people are practice-oriented and tend to enjoy settings to learn that involve research, experimentation, hypothesis-driven ideas, and simulation settings. And then accommodators up here tend to prefer to take in information through concrete experience and transform it through active experimentation. These are action-oriented people. These are the kids who never read the Lego instructions. They just dumped the bucket out and tried to fit things together. I'm seeing some laughing in the conference room. So folks who prefer an accommodating learning style tend to be very action-oriented and do best when they structure their learning through goal setting and have opportunities to test different approaches rather than being passive in their learning. So what I want you to do is think about the theory, what you just learned about these learning styles, and I want you to go back to your groups now and spend another 10 minutes talking about, A, does the theory fit? Does something click there in the way that you guys think about your learning together? And then what I'd like you to do is spend some time thinking about the list of different educational settings and the ones that your group talked about hating, the settings that don't work for you. And I want you to think as a group together about what a faculty member or facilitator or you could do to make those learning settings fit your preferences a little better. And then have somebody in your group write down what you're coming up with, because we're going to take about 10 minutes to share when we come back together.
And as we're applying this theory, I want you to note that a serious diverger is the one who put you into little groups and is making you do this small group stuff. I'm just pointing it out. The theory is happening in front of us. Am I wrong?
Nope. All right, get back in your groups. We will come back together at 8:48. All right, welcome back, everyone.
That was only like 30.
Well, and so.
Okay, what we'd like to do is go through a bit of a report out. So here's our different learning styles. Let's start with the top right with the Divergers group. Can you guys take about 2 minutes to tell us kind of what you thought about the theory, and then anything you came up with how to improve learning settings for people like you?
So when we were going through the different boxes, we initially labeled, I think this is telling, we initially labeled our columns like good and bad, and then we debriefed and said, actually, we feel that it's, that's a little bit dichotomous, so we do more preferred and not preferred. And we kind of talked about how things are maybe on more of a spectrum than in boxes.
Yay!
We kind of did a lot of explaining and debriefing. So some of our preferred is we like lectures, mostly so that we feel prepared for things, and then we also like the debrief for things. So we can get value out of experiences as long as we are bringing some knowledge into it, feel prepared, like we can actually engage in the material as opposed to feel like we're out, like disoriented. And then if it's like an anxiety-provoking situation or like a stressful situation, we find meaning in reflecting on it and debriefing to make it a positive experience. And that's where our synthesis of learning comes from, is putting it together and kind of stepping away, even if we know that we have to get in there and do the damn thing. Sorry, excuse me. We have to do the thing eventually, but it's good for us to kind of take a step back and realize that, okay, this is what we got out of it. So that is helpful. So even when we're in uncomfortable situations, of knowing that we actually do have to act, but being able to step away and kind of make meaning of it. Some other things that we preferred are root cause analysis. We're all like, yes, like we like breaking things up and kind of seeing how things fit. Sometimes it's difficult for us when we have to we talked about making a particular decision and it being almost unidimensional, or like we're taking it and knowledge at a face value because we're thinking about all the other applications of it and what maybe the limitations are. And sometimes that can impede us communicating what we really want because we're thinking about all the caveats rather than making a decision. We liked journaling and reflecting, and we liked teaching others as long as we can synthesize our knowledge, similar to simulations and experiences, as long as we can synthesize things. So is that fair?
So what I'm hearing from you guys is a sort of the concrete experience component of residency is just fine for your learning style as long as you carve out space and time for the reflective observation and don't just drown in a flood of experience.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. How about the assimilators? The bottom right group are.
Yeah, so that was our group. I think we resonated with someone else. I think we resonated with the mantra see one, do one, and teach one, and then kind of having a basic framework. We really liked Dr. Boswick's suicide scripts and how there's a basic framework, and that you can kind of assimilate that knowledge and then put it into practice afterwards.
What about your less preferred settings? What did you guys talk about with how to optimize some of the things that are more difficult for you to learn from?
I think that was easily the standardized patients, just kind of the feeling uncomfortable about kind of going in blind and kind of not having any kind of theoretical background. And so, we preferred kind of knowing a little bit, doing some chart review. I think for us, the more chart review, the better, just to kind of have a basic understanding of what we're going into.
So, and you guys are the corner that, so most people who enter medicine tend to have a preference toward assimilating, in part because we select for that. That you don't make it to med school and residency if you're not really good at optimizing classroom learning and thinking about theory and ideas and making good use of that in that setting. And so the challenge for learners who are really good assimilators is pivoting to that experience of getting tossed in the deep end of the pool and expected to swim when you don't even know what's in the water. And so what I'm hearing you guys say is that one part of that is setting aside, carving out those spaces to give you a little bit of cognitive framework or some sort of hypothesis at least about what might be in that pool that you're jumping into so that you can bring a little theory to bear on that. Other thoughts about things that may optimize the experience-heavy component of apprenticeship learning for you guys?
So we did mention that we like doing, it just takes us a little bit to get there because we need to have the mindset and have the tools to go into a situation. And then the other thing that we were talking about is that for us, the best learning experience is to have like a framework, a curriculum that we can follow, some kind of structure. So we were talking about supervision, for example, that works really well for us when we are provided with some reading material that we go through, reflect on it, and then we get together and discuss things, fill in the blanks, and it's like a very enjoyable situation. So outside of the simulation that was kind of hard for us to grasp, all the other things we were fine with, because we do like doing, just takes us a little time to get there. I don't know.
So rubrics, structures, plans, frameworks, checklists can be really helpful for you guys in bringing theory into the clinical practice.
We love the study guide and the MedHub checklist where we can just keep going and we have some very happy moments when we get to do that. we talked about it.
All right. Well, let's move on to the Convergers. So that's the bottom left group, who might think that these other people are hopelessly ruminative.
I mean, that's not inaccurate. Yeah, so hot air balloon and geese guy. Yeah, we were talking about how we can't imagine experiencing and doing without thinking, because that just leaves us feeling very uncomfortable. But we also struggled with the fact that we like enjoy all of the learning modalities, even the ones that probably aren't effective for us. So I don't know what that says. But I think, yeah, I mean, we like having the other aspects, like the reading and like goal setting, and we enjoy those things, but it doesn't necessarily like consolidate until we actually do it.
Mm-hmm. Now, theoretically, you guys' learning kryptonite is going to be diverging settings. So things like individual supervision or group supervision, where there's a whole bunch of ideas winging around, 99% of which may not actually be applicable to that particular setting. How do you guys optimize group conversations or psychotherapy supervision for your learning?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed that because we were like, well, if we're as a group talking about like M&M or root cause, like we should have just thought about it more in the first place and then implemented initially. Which probably says a lot about it. But I guess, but we did, one thing that we did come up with a lot was that we do also learn really well from observing like in the environment. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just from the experiencing, but just being in the situation itself. I mean, I can see where reflecting would help us come up with a better game plan initially to kind of like revise our hypothesis or revise our practice. But I don't know how to like reframe the actual experience in a way that would be most conducive. Laura, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in if you need to.
Yeah, we had a lot of difficulty with like better like situations versus like not desirable learning situations. It was very hard to divide those. It was like, because we liked all of them, but it was like, instead of looking at it like as how we enjoy these different things, like which ones are more helpful to us. And that changed a little bit. Like we talk a little bit about different like the just lectures, like with a PowerPoint presentation, and how that might not be as helpful even though we enjoy them. Versus like thinking about a problem before having some sort of framework and then acting on it, like using those to actually do something is one of the things that helps the most with a framework. Like we talked a little bit about that, like maybe not just jumping into things without having anything to like hold on might be a little bit hard, rather than having something and then just acting on it. That's the most helpful in terms of learning.
Yeah. I also think one of the things you guys are pointing out really nicely is that we all have learning flexibility, or we try to. And, there are settings that we prefer that work better for us, but flexibility is finding ways to make use of each of the settings for your learning and the ways that each of them can contribute. And it sounds like you guys have done a lot of that.
It's interesting too to think about the fact that medicine kind of selects for people who enjoy learning, right? And since most of us enjoy learning, we are amenable to different styles. We're happy to experiment with different ways, even though there's might be one that's preferred or more effective for us. But I also want you to think about when you're working with your patients, many of whom do not enjoy learning. And in those moments, their preferred learning style becomes super key because they do not have the flexibility that you have. Just throwing that in there.
I mean, I guess it's telling because I feel like through medical school, I felt like I got a good theoretical understanding of things. And then as soon as I was thrown into the situation itself, it felt like a completely different game. Where I couldn't fall back on some of those like theoretical frameworks as much as just actually doing it.
So Blake, that's a nice pivot into the accommodators. Let's have the accommodator group talk to us. The people who, at least the theory would suggest the idea of a full day of didactics might feel like a special form of torture.
Yeah, we talked about how the first 2 years of medical school were a really hard struggle for most of us. I think a lot of us sought out extra help and group, like study groups that we could talk through or work through concepts rather than just sitting in front of a book. We also, most of us, if we're using a manual, will start working on the project and then refer to the manual as we go, if we mess up. And then we like to watch videos in order to learn how to do things rather than like reading through instructions.
So thoughts for you guys on how you make more passive learning.
Was more abstract and reflective than
And I think, you know, it's something I actually talked about this with Michelle yesterday, where it's like, it's not that we don't like doing the other things. Like, I like kind of farting around and thinking about things, but I really have to be in a very specific mindset to do it. If I'm like really trying to learn something that's super not conducive to me, like I was listening to a podcast this morning about like meta ethics, which is great and really stimulating for me, but I'm not going to learn those concepts very well. It'll be more like a general feeling of like, I probably agree with this, but I couldn't necessarily like explain it to you because my mindset wasn't focused on doing that thing. I was just kind of thinking about it. So that wasn't super helpful to learn it necessarily.
So it sounds like what you're saying, particular for some of the more passive learning experiences.
I've watched them. Oh, sorry.
You've got to be, you have to be talking, you have to be thinking, you have to be planning. You can't let an instructor finish a sentence.
To be fair, you were muted, so we couldn't. Or we had the volume off.
Apologies.
I'm teasing you, but again, it does kind of illustrate this. Like, get over it. Let's just make it happen.
Yeah.
Let's quit talking about it.
Yeah.
Cosima, can you say something about our conversations about theory as we've been preparing this session?
Well, so we've done this a couple of different times, and I learn something every time we do it because Sandy is amazing at teaching this stuff. But and also because the theory, you know, I can only listen so long, and then I like start tuning out and like applying it to the things in my head and the experiences that I've had, and then I realize that I've missed a good chunk of theory, and then I'm like, oh, well, next time I'll catch it. But so we do like a framework, and then Sandy fills in all the little things and makes all the pretty slides, and then makes us a list of things to talk about. And whereas my thing is, oh, let's just go in and see what happens. Like, we'll start talking about this and see what people resonate with, and then yeah. So it's very synergistic the way that we work, but we definitely work very differently, and then we can come together, and then we work differently, and then we come together, right? We can't like just because we don't think the same at all. I also remember one of the first times that it became very clear to me that I was now an attending physician and no longer a learner. Because I was like, you know what? I don't feel like reading that chart. I want to go in and talk to that patient and see what I see and feel what I feel, and then see what happens. And I can always read the chart later. I just want to talk to the patient. I want to know the person. I don't want everyone else's opinions on the person, right? And it was so liberating. I was like, I can do that. I can just go talk to a patient. I don't have to read the chart first. I don't have to read like the 6 volumes. I can just go in and get a gestalt, and then I can pick through the volumes and see what suits me and what I need from them. So that
Our
was very
Assimilators just
liberating.
had a collective
I
panic
know, I
attack.
saw.
All right. Well, I want to keep us moving. This is a really rich conversation. We're going to keep coming back to this, but I want to introduce another framework for us to play with. So we'll get back to divergers and assimilators here for a minute. And talking about really making a plan for your learning. And again, for you folks who prefer kind of the right side of things, where you're doing, creating more space for reflection rather than just leaping in with both feet. This can be a way of thinking about anticipating the experiences coming up for you, and then, engaging in that in a way that drives your learning forward. And so this is really kind of 4-step framework for how to make a plan for your learning. And what I would encourage you to do is try this formally for a few months at the start of each rotation to see how it feels for you, especially, again, if you're kind of on the right side of the group. But you can ease off of it, but having this structure of planning your learning, and it really starts with assessing yourself and focusing on, where do I want to be? Where am I now? And how do I understand that gap between the two? And this is a really helpful place to use feedback, to use your evaluations. For those of you who've been through your semi-annuals and have some of your milestones assessments, kind of looking at some of those places where your milestones numbers are a little lower versus the ones that are a little bit higher. Where are the places where I really want to focus my learning? Because we know that you can't kind of do everything all at once. So it's thinking about, what do I set my intentions for? What do I pay attention to? How do I prioritize? And so to take that gap and then to translate that into learning goals. And this really is thinking about not just process, like I want to read 100 pages a week. That's a learning resource, but actually a learning goal, an outcome. I want to know the algorithms for treating acute psychosis. And we're going to talk in a minute about designing SMART goals. And then once you've got your gap, your goals to address that gap, then it's thinking about engaging your learning resources. And at the end of the month, or every 6 months when you do your semi-annual, reassessing your progress. Did you close your learning gaps, and how do you know? And as you're making your learning plan, part of setting your learning goals is thinking about, how am I going to decide at the end whether I met them or not? So those of you who have attended any of the 3 West groups probably know about SMART goals. This is how to set goals for yourself that are not just wishes, but actually a plan for things that you're going to change. The idea being SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. So specific is kind of articulating what's actually going to happen, making it precise rather than something vague. Measurable is that endpoint of, how do I know whether I got it or not? Achievable, when you're thinking about learning goals, this is one place actually where your mentors, your super second, your supervising consultant, your case management supervisor may be helpful. What is achievable in this time frame? Becoming an expert interviewer of preschool age children is probably not an achievable goal for a 3 East rotation. And that's silly, but thinking about the time that you have, the effort that you have, and making your goals fit that setting. Relevant is also, it's related to achievable. Achievable really is don't set goals that are too far off, and also maybe don't set goals that are too limited that you can meet really easily by Thursday. Relevant is thinking about the setting and the learning resources available to you, setting a goal that fits what you're doing right now. So again, your One West rotation is probably not the rotation that you want to be setting a learning goal around dementia. I mean, you could, but that's probably not the best use of that learning time. You know, your ER rotation is probably not the greatest place to learn about psychotherapy, et cetera, et cetera. And then time bound. Again, setting an end point for yourself to reassess, did I achieve my goals? Do my goals need a little bit of tweaking? What do I need to do? And so here's just a couple of ways of looking at goals for a rotation and then making them SMART. So if your goal is something like interviewing, making it more specific to your setting. I will be able to adapt my interview style to my patient's cognitive abilities by the end of my 3 East month. If your goal is to read more, again, read more is not so much an outcome goal as it is process. So what are you going to read about and why? And how are you going to know whether you got what you needed to out of that reading? Or efficiency, you know, and honing that down. And this may be an achievable thing. I was realizing as I was revising this, it takes me 25, 30 minutes to do a consultant admission note. Is that actually an achievable goal for you guys? Or does an admit note take longer than that?
Longer.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of my thought. So you may not have 30 minutes as your goal. That may just be an exercise in frustration. You know, it may be thinking about shaving 5 or 10 minutes off the time that it typically takes you now. And to work with your super second or your SRA or your consultant on what can I do to make this more efficient. So those ideas about kind of thinking about making them specific, making them achievable, making them relevant, so that you are able to assess whether you met them. All right, so what I would like you to do now is take 5 minutes on your own, whip out your cell phone or a piece of paper, think about the rotation you're on right now, and write down 1 or 2 SMART goals for your rotation. All right, now what we're going to do is have you guys, instead of being in groups, be in pairs. And what I want you to do is, with your partner, have each of you review, start at least with 1 SMART goal. Read your goal to your partner, and then get your partner's feedback on whether it's SMART for the rotation you're on. So make sure you let them know what rotation you're on and talk about it. Tweak the goals. Help each other make SMART goals. All right, it looks like we've got people back. If you're in a group, turn around and start staring at a screen again, because that's awesome. What I'd like to hear from folks, we talk about SMART goals as if it's easy and really straightforward, but it's actually kind of tricky. What kinds of roadblocks did you guys come up against, or what were you problem solving around in making goals SMART?
So the ones that we talked about that made it more difficult, I'd say, was the measurable. How are we going to measure? And then also thinking about the achievable, and is this attainable, a goal within the time frame that I have? I think particularly for me, you know, I want to get to a place of mastery, and that's just not attainable in a 1 month rotation on One West, you know, where I've never had child experience. And so I think, you know, doing it, saying with this patient, I'm going to work on this, and then with a different patient, I might pivot my goal a little bit. So definitely the measurable and achievable were our most difficult.
What other challenges did people bump up against? What other things were you problem solving around?
maybe being too general. For me, like I always, like for example in CL, I'm just starting CL. There are so many things that I have to learn. It's a different field, different like consults, different like ways to approach a patient. And it's like, I want to be able to manage common psychiatric consults in an effective way. And it's like, that's very general and probably not achievable in my first month at least. But how do I like move this into a more specific goal? More maybe about diagnostic clarification, or maybe about management, or just interviewing, or making it more specific in order to make it achievable.
Yeah. What else? What else were people struggling with?
Identifying learning gaps.
Can you say more about that, Blake?
I feel like it's sometimes hard to know what I don't know when I feel like there's probably a lot of different things that I don't know.
So it sounds like we're resonating around a couple of the themes. And one really is, it really is that sense of what is a relevant and achievable learning goal for this setting? How do I figure out, and then how do I prioritize when, you know, when I'm a first or second year and my learning goal basically is all of psychiatry? How do I hone that down into something useful and meaningful for the next, you know, couple of weeks, couple of months? The other thing that I'm hearing in here too is, you know, and this is coming from the perspective of being somebody who continues to learn in my own practice, is it takes some experience to kind of start to recognize what you don't know and what those targetable gaps are. And so both of these things to me point to kind of tapping into other resources sort of upstream to help with that gaps idea, and to help with kind of what are my goals? What should I be focusing on right now? And that may lead into a little bit of how do you use some of your learning resources, especially like your faculty, your supervisors, because these may be areas that they can help you with. What I want to do is have Dr. Swintak hop in and start talking about some of the learning resources available during residency.
So I'd like to talk practically. I'd like to talk smack. I want y'all to jump in with 2 feet. I want everyone talking. Unmute yourselves unless you're producing a lot of feedback, and let's have a conversation, right? Because otherwise we'll get too theoretical and I'll get bored. So what are your resources in residency? What are they? That brain, by the way, is supposed to hop around on the slide. It doesn't do it anymore. It only did it once for me, but it was kind of fun. Anyway, what are your resources? What are they? Yell them out. Don't yell.
Patience.
Speak. Patience. As in CE or TS?
TS.
Yes, I agree.
Each other.
Each other, yeah, beautiful. Yep, key resource. What else?
Supervisors.
Supervisors, yes. Who are supervisors? Who are these people? What do they? What do we call them? What are their names?
They are faculty
And
Adults.
humans.
some of them are adults. Yet most of them are humans. Yes. What flavor of humans are they? What are their titles?
Like to teach.
People that like to teach. Those are good. What about the people that don't like to teach people? Are they a resource?
It's what you make of it.
You know what? That's profound and accurate and absolutely true. So you are going to run across all kinds of humanish, people-ish, kind of adultish people who don't like to teach. Do they have something to teach you?
Absolutely.
They do. They do. So how do you maximize them as a resource? That's a complicated question I don't expect you to answer right now. But tell me more about the resources. What titles do they have? These humanish, adultish, people-ish kind of things.
Kind of titles do they?
Yeah, titles. Mayo, we're big with titles. Like, are they residents?
Oh, yeah.
And?
Consultants,
Consultants, yep. And?
Social workers?
Yep.
nurses,
Yep.
Fellows?
Yep.
Administrative staff.
Yep.
Mr. and Mrs.
Sure.
medical students.
Yes. You're getting the idea here, right? If you look around, everybody can be a resource for you. So how do you optimize those resources? We've been spending a lot of time talking about your style, knowing your style, which is really about knowing yourself, right? And I'd like to point out that your style may change depending on what kind of situation you're going into. So when I'm doing something that I love, that I think is fun, that I feel good about, I will jump in 2 feet first. If you send me to CL, which by the way gives me the heebie-jeebies, I will do some chart review most of the time.
Might even
Because
text a colleague before she goes and sees the patient.
see what? Yeah, no, I totally do. I'm like, Sandy, are you on the text? I know it's Sunday, but I need you at work. Yeah, totally. So it depends on your comfort level. Think about like, if you told me to ride a motorcycle today, I wouldn't just hop on the motorcycle. I might, you know, push a few buttons and maybe, you know, learn some rules. And yeah, I mean, I'd be a little wary of that. So think about your style. Know what it is normally. Know what you default to when you're anxious. Figure out the things that work for you in the moment and in general, because those are sometimes very, very different. And I want you to know that you have choice over your mindset. Now, what the hell does that mean? Can you move forward one? Thank you. So a lot of research has been done about how people approach learning, about what they have in their mind that helps them assimilate, but that helps them maximize and optimize any learning situation. And you'll not be surprised to know that there's something called a growth mindset. And that's where a person frames for themselves that they can learn anything they want to, which is very different from thinking, I'm either good at something or I'm not. Do you guys ever think that? Oh, I'm not good at CL, so I'm not going to volunteer to do that. Anybody? Is that just me? Whereas if I say, well, I could probably learn CL if I wanted to. I mean, it can't be that hard. Rackley does it all the time, right? No, that's not a good mindset, people. No. I can learn CL because I'm smart enough. You can also think about what happens when you get frustrated. Am I a person who hits roadblocks and perseveres, or am I a person who gives up as soon as there's a roadblock? Do I like challenges? Do I say, bring it to challenges? Or am I like, no, challenge, nope, that makes me insecure. I'm gonna step this one out because I'm not good at that, and I don't want to learn something new, right? You get the idea here. When you fail, do you think of failure as an opportunity to learn something, or do you think of failure as a comment about who you are as a human being? Something about us doctor types is that we haven't had a lot of failures along the way, a lot of us. And so when we run across true failure for the first time, I don't know what that means, true failure, by the way. When we run across something that we don't immediately kick its ass, we're like, wait a minute, what just happened? Is it me? Is there something wrong with me? Whereas do we think, this is a learning opportunity. I could learn something new here. What kind of input do we want from others when we're learning? Do we want to be praised for trying hard, or do we want to be praised for being good? Right? Inherent in that, again, is how we see ourselves. Do we get inspired when others achieve something, or do we feel threatened by that? Or both? And how do we decide how we are going to, what our achievement is going to be like? Do we think my effort and my attitude are what counts, or do we think, oh, it's all on my abilities? And it goes back to this, I'm either good at something or I'm not. All right, so, and you won't be surprised to know that people who enter into learning situations with a growth mindset actually do much better than those who enter into things with a fixed mindset. Sandy, if you could go back. So any situation that you go into, you know your style, you choose your mindset, you know your resources, but then you also know your obstacles. And you guys mentioned a huge obstacle just a minute ago, which is people who don't like to teach. Are there other obstacles that you can think of?
Time.
Time, yeah, huge obstacle, right? Never enough time.
Ourselves occasionally.
What do you mean?
So it's like, the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. I think Solzhenitsyn said something along the lines of, like, it'd be so easy if there were good people and bad people, and then we could just, like, put all the bad people somewhere. I wouldn't have to worry about it. Same thing. But the reality is like good and bad, runs through, all of us. There's parts of us that are good and parts of us that are bad. There's parts of us that are fixed and parts of us that, are growth minded. And, you could have a really bad day and not really approach something that you would have otherwise approached with a growth mindset, with a fixed mindset, and be hindered by that. So I think kind of having the finger to your pulse of your own attitudes and how you're feeling can help you overcome yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we are often our own biggest obstacle, right? However, if we are generally operating in a growth mindset, then a bad day doesn't need to be insurmountable, right? We can come back the next day and be like, yesterday was not a good day. Today, at least I'm going to start the day with a better mindset. Let's see what happens at the end. But, so self-awareness is one way of overcoming the obstacle of self, right? Beautiful. Other obstacles.
Focus. I feel like there's a lot of different paths you can take towards learning, and a lot of different regions you can focus on in learning. But I feel like if you try and spread yourself to learn too many things, then you'll eventually hit some kind of wall where it's just too much.
So the old drinking from a fire hose concept. Yes. When you'd rather be taking some sips, some dainty sips. And that goes back to SMART goals, right? I am not going to drink from this fire hose today, even though it's wide open. But instead, I'm going to pick a small section. This analogy, it's kind of broken down now, but you get the idea. All right. So can we talk frankly about the resources in residency, in this residency in particular, and can we problem solve together how we work around some of those? Zoom is very conducive to this kind of intimate conversation with one another. Come on, guys, jump in.
We're talking about which resources we have.
Yeah, well, we're talking about our obstacles right now.
Obstacles still. Okay.
Yeah, because here's what I often hear, Julie. I often hear, in this residency, we don't get a lot of teaching. We don't focus enough on learning. We don't have enough learning opportunities, and our faculty don't like or don't have time to teach. These are all criticisms that I hear usually on a yearly basis. Is that true? And it might be, people. I'm kind of a hard person to like confront, I guess, realistically about this stuff in case I'm delusional about the value of our program. But it is a good time. If I'm delusional, tell me. Because I would say all of those things are not true, Julie, and I'm going to stop cutting you off.
I think in this instance, for me, it's been making sure that I reach out and actually ask for help or teaching time if I feel like I need it, not waiting for it to be offered. Because like you pointed out, we have all these resources, but if I feel like I'm not understanding something, speaking up has yielded a lot more positive learning time, even just in like 5-10 minute increments where I've learned a ton versus, you know, necessarily having sit down didactic time where I might learn just as much just because of my learning style personally. But I've found that the consultants are really helpful when I actually ask what I have to ask.
Is there a way you're asking that's been useful? Can you enlighten the rest of us?
Like when I ask, or
Okay, say more.
I guess I think making sure that if we're in rounds or something and I don't understand why a plan is what it is, that I say so.
Perfect.
And ask for clarification about why like one certain medicine would be better to use over something else rather than just kind of letting it go by.
Good.
Yeah, we were talking about in our small group how difficult it is transitioning from med student to resident, because in med school there's this pressure of you're being evaluated by the person that you're learning from, and I guess still in residency too, but maybe not to the same with the same gravity. But just how we're kind of conditioned to be quiet about our areas where we feel we have a lack of knowledge, and trying to like push back on that in our own selves and know that we're the ones who are going to benefit if we admit that we don't know something, because then we can learn it.
This is beautiful. So Julie, what I heard you say right now is that an obstacle to your learning sometimes is this feeling of you're being evaluated, or the reality of you're being evaluated, right? People, right here, what does it mean to be evaluated in residency? What does it mean?
I don't know.
Blake, what if I told you tomorrow, I called you to my office, Blake, and I said, Blake, you suck. I mean, people, I'd say a lot more words, right? But the bottom line would be is Blake sucks, right? That's what he'd leave thinking. So what?
Well, I mean, I imagine like that you evaluate us to try to help us get better and not suck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly, Blake. So I want you to hear his words, all of you, right now. Look me in the eyes. We are not evaluating you so that we can fail you. Okay? We signed you up for this residency with the idea that we would get you through. And through means you're going to be good psychiatrists, not mediocre psychiatrists, good. Some of you will even be excellent. All right, so us evaluating you is not about we are going to fail you. It's about we are going to identify gaps that we can work on together. You know when we cannot work on gaps together?
We're quiet.
When you're quiet.
I mean, not quiet, but like don't express that we have.
When we don't know that there are gaps, absolutely. Do you know when else we can't work on gaps together?
When you have a fixed mindset.
Yep. And what does that look like in this particular instance?
It would be not being receptive to feedback.
Yeah, like if I said, Blake, you suck, and you said, I don't suck. You suck.
No, I definitely do.
You don't. All right? We haven't had that conversation yet, so you don't suck.
It's only been a month.
I do suck, but that's a different story. Look, when you get feedback that one of your faculty or one of your training directors says, hey, here's a relative deficit, because that's what we're going to say to you. Hey, there's a relative deficit. there's something that you're struggling with, there's something that doesn't seem to be fitting for you. If you say, you're mean, you don't like me, you're trying to fail me, and you're wrong, we're not going to be able to be very helpful. If you say, I don't get it, but I'll stay open to this idea and we'll work together to figure out how to get me to the next level, then all is good. We just get work to get to the next level. I'm dumbing it down a little bit, but only a weeny weeny little bit, okay? Again, this evaluation concept in residency is about, are you achieving the milestones that you need to be achieving? Are you mastering the skills that you need to be mastering? If you're not, that's not any kind of commentary on you as a human being. That's an opportunity for us to work together to reach the next level. Okay?
Can I hop in really quick?
Please do.
You guys, as we were talking about the SMART goals, said identifying the learning gap was a challenge. This is the whole point of assessment in residency, is to help you identify your learning gaps. And that's the growth mindset. If having a gap, you finding a gap, or your faculty member or your program director helping articulate a gap feels like a message of you suck, then we've all failed, because the learning plan starts with the gap. And so we can't learn if we don't have the gap. And so the whole point of all of this is starting that learning plan together. But if we're all stuck in a fixed mindset where a gap means you suck, then as a learner, I feel threatened by a gap. As a faculty member and a facilitator, I feel like I can't help you find a gap because I know you don't suck, and I definitely don't want to say that you suck.
So that's one huge obstacle, is this idea of assessment. You guys mentioned a couple others that I would like us to touch on if you guys are game, and that's time and people who don't like to teach. And Allie said a little bit about, said something about both of those, right? Can you expound on them for me? Can we talk about these things?
Me specifically?
No, you've already done your part, Allie. You were awesome. Make the rest of them step up.
I mean, even if somebody does not want to teach, they still have to do their job, right? So by us as just observing, just the way they're standing there in the room can be a learning opportunity, you know? Where are they positioning themselves? How are they approaching the patient? So if we're looking to learn, there's a million ways, even if somebody's not volunteering. And because our job, it's a lot about human interaction, I feel it's the perfect setting to learn without someone even talking about the theory of it. So a lot of observation is our best friend.
Yeah, Natalia, that's absolutely right on. I used to say all the time that, you know, some people can teach you everything about how you don't want to do things. I decided, though, that that was too negative, and that I shouldn't say things like that. So let's pretend that I didn't say that, or you can hear it and turn it into a positive, whatever works for you. But also, how do you get from people the things that they do have to teach you, even if they don't want to teach? How do you get that from them? And I want you to think back to the earlier parts of this lecture. I want you to think about all the theory that we just learned about learning.
I've learned a lot from, I mean, it's kind of along the same lines of that slightly negative view of it, but I've learned a lot, and probably maybe even more, from people doing the wrong thing and the experience of being there and realizing that I wanted to learn and how to approach that situation differently. Particularly from experiences pre-Mayo, where there wasn't such an emphasis on excellence. And also like non-psychiatrists, like other areas of medicine, I sometimes will see deficits in like their patient care that makes me want to get better at that, so that I can be better at taking care of patients in general, not just from a psychiatric standpoint.
the other thing that I was thinking of, sorry for barging in again, is that like attitude is everything. And I feel that sometimes when you're like go interested and put a lot of effort into things, even somebody who does not want to teach can sense that. And if you find like common ground, something that this person like really passionate about, and it's maybe not the thing that you were expecting to learn or you wanted to learn, but if there's like common ground, and even if it's just talking about it, then you find something to learn.
Dr. Rackley, you're not teaching me enough. I am not learning enough on this rotation, and I really wish that you would teach more.
Great. What do you want to learn about?
Well, whatever you want to teach me. You haven't taught me anything.
Cool.
Dr. Rackley, these are my learning objectives, and I'm going to write them up on the board. Let's go through them one by one each day during this rotation.
How about today is Friday and these are my learning objectives for the week versus today is Monday and these are my learning objectives for the week? How about Dr. Rackley? I've watched you interact with patients and I love the way that you do XYZ. Do you think you and I could talk about how I do XYZ, how it's different, how it's not as effective, how Dr. Rackley, you look busy and harried today, and I see you trying to leave the room as I'm talking to you. Might there be some other time where you and I can spend, I don't know, 5 minutes to talk about, inject something specific here? Dr. Rackley, can you give me some feedback on how I'm doing on today's lecture? Go ahead.
Yeah, let me think about it a sec. I was not ready to be asked that. Dr. Swintak, I think you are, it seems like based on the way our learners are reacting that they're engaged with you, that you're meshing
No,
where
you're
they
wrong.
are.
That is not true. You just don't know me at all.
Okay.
Okay, you see what I'm saying here, people? There's a way to approach somebody. There's a way to hear. I mean, she was saying nice things, right? Which made that kind of a difficult situation. But let's say she said that I sucked, which she already said she's never going to say. But let's say she did say that I sucked. And I was like, I don't suck. I don't suck. You're wrong. Versus I say, your objective experience of my sucking is different from my subjective experience of my sucking. Dr. Rackley, can you say more? All right. You get the idea. So the other things that I was thinking of is if you are coming with a certain learning style and say you want to read a book, and your consultant, Dr. Swintak, wants you to just see the patient. And you're like, shit. And you're so overwhelmed and flooded that you don't, Jeremiah, want to just go see this patient. And it's not going to be a learning experience. How do you help Dr. Swintak help you in that instance? Anybody? Anybody?
Dr. Swintak, I would appreciate some basic framework before I go talk to this patient, if you have any brief ideas for me.
Okay, so what I'm saying here, and Jeremiah, thank you for playing along, is it helps if you understand where somebody else is coming from, and then you help them see where you're coming from. Even if you don't understand where they're coming from, that's not necessary, it's helpful. But if you tell them, hey, look, if, for me to optimize this experience, here's what would be really nice. If you would give me 5 minutes to flip through this chart, I can see that you're in a big hurry, but I just need 3 minutes to flip through this chart to get my head in the right place. And then would you go see this patient with me, right? So you are adult learners and colleagues, and you can speak up as to what you need and what would be helpful for you in the moment. The time thing is something that all of us struggle with, and so be sensitive to that, but also prioritize. So if you're insisting that this is important, and Allie, Natalia, Blake, everyone's alluded to this. If this is important, I don't understand, or this is an opportunity for me to learn, we don't have to take a huge chunk of time, but I really need you to stop and we need to talk about what's going on here. There are going to be a couple people, there are always a couple people who screw up my lecture, but there are going to be a couple people who are going to say, no, we're not taking the time, know who they are, don't take it personally, move on. But the vast majority of people will be like, oh, yeah, okay, sorry. All right, let's take 30 seconds to quick run through, right? And 30 seconds always takes longer than 30 seconds, we all know. So you're with me. Think about who you're dealing with, but know yourself first, and then speak up. And remember that evaluation is relative. It's all about moving you along your own objectives. And I'm going to end there. Yeah, because we're running low on time. Rackley, anything else we need to cover?
We've got 3 minutes. Any questions, things you guys wanted to?
I did have a question about the learning styles and the role that anxiety about learning plays into it. Because I feel like the more anxious I am, the more rigid I behave. And I think Dr. Swintek and Dr. Rackley both know that. So how do we account for that?
I think it's a great question, Natalia. I would, in Kolb's theory, I think he would probably say that anxiety plays a role in reducing flexibility in learning, that you kind of get locked into one part of the cycle and aren't able to keep moving around the learning cycle. There's others who identify anxiety as kind of a resistance to learning, that, you know, learning involves change, and change is hard for all of us. And the more anxious we are, the more threatening change is. And that's where we get into that growth versus fixed mindset, that anxiety can, you know, a fixed mindset really is like, I'm not going to let myself be vulnerable. A growth mindset is I will let myself be vulnerable. But when we feel anxious and under threat, of course, we're not going to let ourselves be vulnerable. We're going to stay stuck in not changing. And so this is where we have a mutual responsibility to create an environment where people feel safe enough to learn and grow.
Here's the tricky part about that, though. Without anxiety, without some discomfort, we don't grow. Because if we're comfortable, why would we change, right? It's only when there's some discomfort that people move. And so our goal, our challenge, really, the dialectic that we have in residency training is, how do we titrate your anxiety just enough that you keep moving, but you don't get flooded, okay? And so for each of us, there's some optimum amount of anxiety that helps us keep learning. Now, when we design curricula, can we individualize that to each of you? I wish. No, we cannot, right? So we aim for some general place, and then hopefully that's enough, but not too much for each of you. Okay, but this is where it's your responsibility to speak up in the moment and say, Swintek, I can't go see this patient right now, I'm flooded. Or, you know what, this isn't challenging enough for me, Swintek. How do we step it up, right? I don't know. I get a sense sometimes because I'm paying attention, but unless we talk about it, don't know. So there's got to be some anxiety. There's got to be some tension there. There's got to be some impetus for change and growth. Without that, we don't move. Too much, we also don't move, right? So there's some sweet spot that we sometimes hit and sometimes don't.
On that note, I'm getting anxious because it's 10:01 and we all have seminars to go to. Thank you guys for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please send us feedback on how this was and what we can do to tweak this and make it better in the future.
We will keep a growth mindset.